welcome to another episode of Not Your Average Man. I'm Chris. I'm here with Brad, and we got some great stuff to share with you again today. Before we get to that, though, we do want to thank everybody who's already been hitting us up with some reviews and have been subscribing and following, and we really appreciate that. Thanks for the 5 stars. Look, just scroll down to the bottom, hit 5 stars. You don't even have to write anything, although we do appreciate it. But it helps get the word out, and also share it with your friends, right? Tell your guy friends and go, look, there's these dudes. They're talking. They got great stuff. They're trying to help out. Let's give them a listen, give them a review, hit them up. And in fact, we have a review that we wanted to share that Brad has pulled up.
We do. This is from, I mean, people spell things weird on these anyway, but this is from Big Daddy. I want to meet this dude, right?
I do.
And this could be one of those, like, hey, they call him Tiny and he shows up and he's real big, or, so maybe Big Daddy could be like a little dude. I don't know.
Go ahead.
But anyway, thank you. So he dropped this review, such an important ministry. A podcast and ministry that seeks to train and encourage men to follow God is so desperately needed in today's world. So far, this podcast has been awesome. Chris and Brad have incredible marriage ministries, and Not Your Average Man is creating a community of men seeking after Christ and becoming the men they are called to be. Man, that's awesome. That's why.
Boom.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Big Daddy.
Dude.
I like
Thanks,
it.
Big Daddy. And I'm with you. When you said, I want to meet this, I agree. So if you're Big Daddy and you can prove to us that you're Big Daddy, we actually would like to have you on. Brad didn't know this, but we'll have you on sometime just to say, hey, give a shout out. If you don't want to come on, that's cool, but we'd still like to meet you and maybe take a picture with you or something. I don't know.
We can blur out the face. You just pixelate the face.
Alter the voice so it could be like, right, whatever.
Exactly.
But we still want to meet you. And if you haven't given us a review, we might want to meet you too. So you know what? Yeah. And also hit us up on email at notyouraverageman.com. And we don't have a website, but you can still email us. And if you're watching us on YouTube, certainly drop a comment below. I mean, we want to hear from you. We want to know what's going on, what's on your mind. If there's something pressing, something you want to know about us, or just about the Christian walk, being a Christian man, Christian husband, whatever. Right. I guess there's that it. There's that it.
No, I mean, you could probably switch those words around. I don't know. I'm not an English major.
All words are made up.
It's true, actually. You're right.
So somebody at one point in time said, "This is the order." Who made them right over everybody else?
I mean, we were all speaking one language, right? Until Babylon.
Exactly. That's exactly. But actually, and I didn't even mean to make this a transition, but if we don't all speak in the right order, if we don't put our words in the right order, it's really hard to understand what the other person's saying. So if we are just all do our own thing and don't abide by any kind of guidelines or any kind of rules or anything like that, then things can get really jumbled up and just become pure chaos, and that doesn't benefit anybody. And so today we're actually talking about this idea of how do we keep things from turning to chaotic? How do we make sure we're put boundaries in place and all that, and saying no?
Yeah, it's a crazy. I mean, that was a cool transition, actually. That's super cool.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Sounds like you're getting into priority.
What?
No, we were talking about this and sharing notes on it, and Lisa and I learned the hard way that first, let's go way back. First, getting your priorities in check, right? Like your priority. God is our priority individually in our lives, and together as a married couple. He's our ultimate priority. Now, in other areas, we have a priority, right? But our ultimate overarching priority is Christ and whatever we need to do, in our walk with Christ, period. That being said, with everything else, that it kind of just starts to fall in line. And if those are out of whack, then it's a bad time, right? Is that?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's a bad time.
You mean, it almost sounds like what you're saying, Brad, is if you first seek the kingdom, then all these other things will be added on to you. Kind of like if we seek to build our own kingdom, that then can all fall apart. But if we seek God's kingdom, then he kind of tries to help make sure that things move forward and gives us resources, strength. It equips us. Oh, that's awesome. I love that concept.
Yeah, I wish I would have made it up. I came up with it myself. But it's Matthew 6:33. Yeah. That's actually I love that verse. That is one of my verses that I've memorized. I try to memorize verses, and that's one of them that I memorized because it's so like accurate, right? And that's something that we preach. I preach all the time on a daily basis because someone will say, so let me give a shout out to 24/7 Marriage, Javi from 24/7 Marriage. He was visiting.
Hey, Javi,
visiting the house.
Shut up! Oh, nice.
Exactly. I love it. So they came through and last year sometime, and we had never met them face to face. So this is the first time they roll into town, made a special stop to El Paso to meet us. And we did a couple of episodes with them. And I said, this is what I used to always say till I met Javi. I said, hey, you need to make sure your priorities are right and you put God first, right? That was my thing, right? It's not wrong, right?
Sure.
And he's like,
spot the line.
Interesting. Yeah. And he's like, interesting. Priorities was pluralized only so many years ago, and then he cites this thing, and I wish I could cite it because it legitimately blew my mind because I was like, that is the definition of priority. How can you pluralize it? Right? And so we got into this discussion on that. And so ever since then, I'm like, okay, listen, I have couples, we have couples that we coach, talk to, all these things. And they'll be like, well, our priorities are out of whack. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's understand that you need one priority. That's it. That's your first, it's God's your priority. Under that, sorry, I smoked a few packs before we started. So I don't smoke, I'm just joking. But on top of that, everything else falls into place, right? And so it's just something that I've learned throughout the years, right? Like I don't have a bunch of priorities. Sure. I have one priority, and then everything else starts falling. Yeah,
I love this line from The Incredibles, and it's at the end when the villain he was going to sell all his tech when he's done, and then that way everybody can be super, and then when everybody's super, no one will be super. Right, and it's that idea, right? If everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority.
Then nothing's a priority. Yeah.
Right. So we've got to have a priority. Everything else could be secondary, third, whatever, or if you want to get fancy, tertiary, right? Well, but all that kind of stuff. But we've got to have one. Yeah, I know. But one priority, and then that's the priority. Now, does that mean that that's our one a single focus or no? No, because we got to fill in other things while it's going on, but we got to know what our true priority is and filter everything through that. Because if not, chaos. I was hearing somebody else was talking about because we'll run off on our own strength, our own energy. We won't have any boundaries as far as like keeping people out from our resources, and we won't be saying no to people. And then we will deplete ourselves and give up of ourselves and not have anything left for anybody else and for the ones that matter the most. Right. And so if we're not going, okay, this guy gets my first, and then my spouse, my second, my kids, third, right? Then work and keep building our way out. That's the order. Then we're going to it's not going to work right.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying too goes along with what we talked about last week when we were talking about how you can't give work all your energy. Like you need to have something when you come home. Maybe it's a different energy inside you, so you are exhausted from work, but when you come home, you get this like rejuvenation to be with your family. It's the same thing, exactly what you're talking about. If my priority is out of whack and I'm filling it, I'm giving all my energy to something else, there's going to be other things that fall off, even if your priority is good. So like
Yeah,
I said, our
sure.
priority is in Christ, right? That is my full priority individually and with Lisa. Now, a few months ago when we were going through our marriage reboot and then we were hanging out with you guys for a week, there was a chart or a section that said, I'm going to get this wrong, but it basically was the stop doing section, right?
Right.
Things like list things that you need to stop doing so your vision, your purpose, all these things can flourish, right? So what are the things you stop doing? So Lisa and I get to this individually and we're looking at it and I start writing stuff down. And some of the stuff I needed to stop doing was church related. And it wasn't because it was bad. It wasn't because of anything else. Like, it wasn't like the stressors or, I mean, there are stressors, but it wasn't anything horrible. And I'm doing good things, right? Like, I'm involved in our church. Like, I'm trying to help. I'm trying to do these things. Those aren't, so the stop doing list or the things you need to say no to or create boundaries around doesn't mean that they're bad. And I think that's inherently what people lean to is like, oh, well, I need to stop doing all these bad things, all these little bad habits I need to stop doing. And maybe that is true. But also some of those draining things, not in a bad way. I'm trying not to say this any negative, but things drain you. Things drain people, right? So I'm not trying to be like, this is so negative, but some of those things you need to say no to.
Oh, yeah.
Because all your energy is going somewhere, right? And if you're if you're chaos, if there's chaos going on, your energy is going all over the place, things are going to start falling off. And usually the first thing that starts falling off is intimacy with your wife. Physical and emotional.
Well, how many times have we heard that my spouse is getting all the scraps, or I'm only getting just the leftovers, the scraps from my wife and my kids just get my leftovers and all that. And by the way, if you liked the priority stuff, then you might like this too. Do you know what the enemy of great is? Good. Good is the enemy of great. Yep. Right? Because you can only have a great or so much great. But you keep loading on good and keep saying yes to good, you're not able to say yes to great. Because when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And so if I keep saying yes to good, then I'm saying no to great.
That's good, man. You have a t-shirt? You have a t-shirt with that on it?
You know, I was actually thinking about that. We should get some t-shirts, like get some Not Your Average Man t-shirts. One's like, did you remember to pray? You know, so like, so we'll check out our Not website and we'll have them on pre-sale.
Or it could be like a little campfire with a bunch of beards around it. Just sitting, I love beards. It. No people, just beards and a campfire.
And a campfire. That's fantastic. Oh, we will come out with some shirts. I love that. We will do that.
Absolutely.
So what you were saying too is great. There's a lot of good things that we'll get caught up in, and we see ourselves doing good. But is it the great? Is it the priority? Is it keeping us from great? Because everything comes at a cost. Only so many hours in the day. You only have so much energy on our own, because us mere mortals, our batteries will run out. We got to stay plugged in to the vine. And so are we devoting too much to the wrong things? Now, I'm not saying there's not seasons. Please, guys, don't hear what I'm not saying, because I know there's going to be, like, when we're recording this, there's a hurricane that's just ripped through Florida and the Carolinas, right? That's going to change your schedule. That's going to resort your priorities. When we're not, and during the norm, during the rhythm, right? Are we making sure that we're putting first things first? Are you making sure that you're saying no, which is hard? Saying no is hard to some people, to a lot of people. We talked about me being a passive husband in episode 3. This idea of saying no, like, feels offensive. Like, people aren't going to like me. People are going to be upset. But that's one of the things that helps me is knowing every time I'm saying yes to something, I'm saying no to something else. So if you don't like saying no, well, then you are saying no every time you say yes. And unfortunately, it's usually to your wife. It's usually to your kids. Well, I told church I was going to do this, or I told work I could help with that, or I told this I could do it. Well, did you have to? Well, if I don't do that, then they might not look at me as good for the next promotion, or maybe. But what happens when you don't have your wife or your kids no longer want to spend time with you? You know, I don't know, guys. It's that. What are you saying no to, and is it the wrong thing? Because Brad, I'm going to steal your notes.
Yeah. No, please.
Are
please.
Are you too busy for your family? Are you saying no to them? That's and if so, why? Is it for the right reasons?
Yeah, and I think that only goes. You have a great point. Is it for the right reasons? But then that only goes so far. Because, and that's kind of what I was hinting at, right? Like I've seen personally, and I'm sure you have too, you talk to pastors and their family dynamic is on thin ice, right? And it's because, and this is what you'll hear from pastor kids. They gave everything to the church. Yeah. He was always about the church. He was putting the church first, all these things. It's not necessarily bad. Right. No. And that's, so it's like, okay, I'm saying someone needs a lot of help. I'm saying yes to helping them right now. In essence, what I'm not saying is I'm having to say no to whatever's going on with my family. Right. But you can only do that so many times. I've talked to a few people and it's like, man, I feel like I'm so busy and I can't not do these things. I have to, I feel compelled to help more people. And that's great. You should be, right? We're all servants, right? That's what Jesus led by being a servant, right? But Jesus also took time to himself in solitude to pray. He also, he took his rest days, all these things. And so there was times where he, technically said no while he was resting or praying, all these other times. The Bible highlights when he's clearly, miracles and doing all these things. Of course, that's what we want to see. But also you see him take rest. You see him do all these things. And it's a model that we need to take, because you can look at your priorities right now. You're listening to this. You can look at your priority right now and be like, okay, my priority is in Christ. I do lead my family well, spiritually and physically. My wife and I are doing our marriage is doing great. And you're saying yes to all these other things. You're going to see things start to deteriorate. And it won't be fast. It's something that'll slowly start to happen. And all of a sudden, your kids are like, oh, well, dad can't do this with me because he's got to go to do X. Or, and yes, there are seasons, and we're not saying that because there are busy seasons. When you have babies and you're doing all these things, it is super, super busy, of course. But you need to take time. Even in my notes, when I was talking about this, I also mentioned, are you taking time for yourself? Right. And that sounds so selfish when you think about it at first, but it's not. It's really not. I take time for myself in the sense of I do have my quiet time. I do have my devotion time. A lot of times when I'm taking time for myself, 100% of the time, God is involved in it because I weave him through my whole life. So it is separate from my devotion time. But even when I work out in the morning, that's time for me. And I know that might sound crazy to some people, but for me, I work out and I got my music blaring and that's just my time. And sometimes my middle child will come out and hang out and work out. And I think that's great. But overall, that's my time to just do something for me. And it might be something different. I know one of my buddies, this is actually kind of cool. At least once a month, he will go camping by himself, solo camping, and just go out, out in the mountain with one man tent, one man everything, and spend 2 nights there. And I talked to him about it. He's not he's not spiritual or anything like that. But I'm like, why do you do that? And he's like, man, it's just time for me to get away I love the outdoors, and also for him, it's like a challenge. He's like, I want to make sure that I'm staying like knife edge, right? Like I'm staying, like I could still do it. I like comfort, but I could still go out and lay on that rock. So it is interesting when you talk to him, but that's time for himself. It doesn't sound relaxing to a lot of people. To me, it does. It doesn't sound relaxing. So it could, that could be a drain for some people. But like for me, when I work out or something like that, like it fills me, right? Like I'm rejuvenated after.
Yeah. Just for those of you who don't know, both Brad and my wife both have shirts that say, I've been perfecting social distancing since way before COVID.
I do. I was going to wear it today. I couldn't find it. I have a shirt. It has a stick figure archery guy and a target on the other side. And it says, I've been practicing social distancing or something along those lines. But
that's what it is. Something like that.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing your dude. I'm thinking your buddy, and I'm thinking he sounds like an introvert to me. He's probably if you're into the Enneagram, he's probably Enneagram 5, going, okay, you people, I'm done. I'm gonna. Right. But that's actually good. That's a good point though, because if you're an introvert, you need that time to recharge. If you're not good for yourself, how could you possibly be good for other people, right? If you've run yourself so ragged and you're just tired and you're just deplete, then when are you going to be able to be good for anybody? Or I guess the other way to look at that is, when are you going to not build up resentment and build up this mindset that I always have to do for others, and they really don't care as much. They don't see my sacrifice, right? All these things are going to slip in and just go right in there. Yeah, you got to be. I was thinking too, when you're talking about the kids asking, ask this. There's a day the kids will stop asking, because why bother? Well, I already know what my dad's answer is going to be. Because he's done it so many times in the past. I just know he's going to say no. So I'm just not going to even bother asking anymore, because I'm got to learn that my dad's not there for me. I've got to learn just to depend on myself, that I just got to look out for myself, depend on myself. Like so many of you all who are listening are probably in that boat too, where you've just learned, I just rubbed some dirt in it, just walk it off, right? Just depend on me. Just depend on me. I can't work on other people. And it comes out in your relationship, comes out with your wife. You try to reach out to your wife and she doesn't handle it or respond well. And then you just go, what was I thinking? I just depend on me. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say anybody's doing anything wrong. I don't want to imply that somebody's dad's doing anything wrong. I've just tried to suggest that we don't want to necessarily get ourselves into the position where we're setting up these patterns of people feeling like they can't reach out to us, right? Well, don't we want our kids to feel like they can reach out to us? Don't we want our kids to feel like that we're there for them, that we got their backs, that we're, when the world turns its back on them, that we're there?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I mean, I've told
if you
my
got kids.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've told my kids, I'm like, listen, if something happens, I want you to tell me. Like, I want you to call me. Of course, if you're in trouble, right? They'll of course call. Or I've given them, like, told them, you need to call me. If you're in trouble, call me. Don't worry about it. But I've even gone as far as say, like, if you've done something bad, like, call me. It's fine. Like, I'm not telling you you're not going to get in trouble, but like, you can call me. Like, I'd rather them call me than say, oh no, like, I did this wrong. I don't want my dad to know. Right? Like, who do I reach out to now? Right? And I'd rather them say, no, I'm in trouble. I've done something bad. I can call my dad. I'm not going to get off scot-free, but I can call my dad, and he can at least be there to be like, hey, it's just like how we run to Christ. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's a perfect example. I know
that's a great example.
That. I'm a sinner and I run to God. It's not like, I know, like, there's probably going to be consequences, earthly consequences for what I've done. But every time I run to him, his arms are open and he's going to be there, and he's going to, like, comfort me, and he's going to help me understand. and I'm going to learn from it. Like, probably shouldn't do that. But probably shouldn't put myself in those situations. But that's a big piece of understanding, like just communicating with your kids, right? When Lisa and I were working all this stuff out, and I was learning to be the dad that Christ has called me to be, learning to be the husband that Christ has called me. That's when I started learning that work wasn't as important as it is. Right? That makes sense. Like work is important.
Absolutely.
What I do for a living is important, clearly, but it's not as important as a legacy. It's not as important as a marriage, right? I can get another job. I might not like the other job, but I can get another job, right?
Sure.
And you know what? If I left tomorrow, they're going to find someone to put right back where I'm at, right? It might take them, I would like to think it'd take them a couple weeks to figure it out. But in all reality, if I left, they're just going to plug someone else right in there and be like, here, you could do this.
You'd like for them to say when you tell them, all right, I'm going to give you 2 weeks. You'd like for them to go, well, we don't need the full 2 weeks. We could have the new guy in here next week.
Yeah. You can leave tomorrow if you want. Like, wait, what?
Yeah.
No, that's not what I wanted to hear. I wanted you to hear, oh, well, can you give us a month?
Yeah. What are we going to do without you?
Exactly. Right. Like, come on. But that's when I started learning to say no to things, and almost some of the bad things I had to say no to was on a ruthless level, right? Where I didn't worry about other feelings, and I'm not trying to be mean, but it was more of that, when the Bible talks about cut your right hand if it causes you to sin, gouge your eyes out, things like that.
Sure.
It was more on that level where it was like, no, these are things I have to be done with. I'm not doing these anymore. But then the good things I had to say no to, those are a little harder, but you have to understand where you're coming from, right? It's out of families first. Like your first ministry that you're called to is your marriage. And then it's your family, like your family grows, right? That's the first one. Everything else, like, listen, we have a ministry. And we want it to grow, and we want everyone to hear everything we have to say. We want all these things. We want to help all these marriages, but not at the sacrifice of our marriage, not at the sacrifice of our family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said that, because I was thinking that too, even when you're talking about with some of the pastors or some of the ministries and stuff like that. Well, they give everything to the church and all that. That's not scriptural. That's not biblical. We're not supposed to give everything, right? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, giving themselves sacrificially. So yes, Christ gave himself sacrificially to the church. So there's absolutely a giving that. But husbands, you're supposed to love your wives in that manner, giving yourself sacrificially to your wife. So if you're going to be sacrificing anything, it needs to be your first or primary ministry, which is your wife and then your kids. In that order, right? We don't want to put the kids first. Well, and also I wanted to say real fast that I love what you were saying before about the running to the kids being able to run into your arms. One, the beginning of every bad teen horror movie starts off with the kids not getting the adults involved, right? So, oh, we got to do this ourselves. No, I got to call my dad. No, you can't, right? But also, right? But also, it's that idea, the earthly example.
No, I'm just saying, like, I would be so mad if my kids didn't call me and give me the opportunity, right? That would be what's going through their head. Like the horror movie, like, I need to call my dad. No, don't call him. No, he'd be mad if he doesn't have this opportunity. I need to give him
I know. He's worse than whatever we did last summer, right? But right, because men, if you are a father, if you're becoming a father, right, you are the earthly example of God in your kids' lives. And don't you want them to run to Jesus, to the open arms, to when they're in trouble, when they're struggling? Don't you want to run to Jesus, with his open arms when you're struggling and when you need help and when you need comfort, right? So there's that lesson, right? That passing that over. There's all these models that we don't realize that's getting put in place, but ultimately we're talking about boundaries, right? the ability, if you haven't picked it up, guys, we're talking about boundaries. They're healthy. they're actually even God's ideas. Mm-hmm. Right? I was thinking about that, actually, that we're even in creation, where God creates the earth and the water and says the water, okay, you come this far and no further. That's a boundary. That's because it's an organization. It's not, so that way we can have water here and land there and not be mixing up. And are there, yes, there's flooding going on right now. I'm not saying that, but right. So they're setting up the structure. And then even in the garden tells Adam, hey, you're free to eat whatever you want to eat, except this. But don't do this, right? And it's for our protection, because this is too much. This brings sin into the world. You just don't want it, and so but you're free to do all this other stuff. And then you go into the 10 Commandments, and you can look at all this other stuff. Hey, don't have other gods than me. It's better just be with me. And even we talked about this when we were with Matt. He talked about how like this idolatry is like it was referred to as adultery. They're adulterous people. So there's just all these things that are just such a good idea. And I was getting to this point where, because I had heard someone saying about that Jesus died for our sins, right? So he died for a hurt and a lost and dying world, which is what we got outside our windows. So we need to be vigilant. We need to be at work with that. But what I heard them saying is that Jesus did not lay out his life to enable bad behavior. So his goal, he wasn't doing this for us to do wrong things and to have bad behavior. He was doing this so we could not eat of that tree. We could eat of the other stuff that he's protected us from, that he's trying to say, hey, look, do these things because they're better for you. They work out better. And so, I mean,
the other way to put that is, his grace isn't there so you can do whatever you want and be forgiven. That's not what all this is about. Will he forgive you no matter what? Yes, but that's not, his grace isn't there for you just to do whatever you want. So that's that's just another way of putting what you just said. I love that, right? I mean, I love that you said that you mentioned that. The boundaries, he's put so many boundaries in place for us, and they're not restrictive. And if you aren't living for Christ, you would feel like everything's a list of no's, right? I can't do all these things. And I've talked about it on this podcast. I've talked about other podcasts, but you get this like list of don't do these, don't do these, don't do these. It's not like that. It's actually there's freedom in this discipline. There really is. And it's not that I'm trying to sell you on it or anything like that. It's something that you have to like get into and understand for yourself. You really do.
Sure.
But there is freedom. But learning the examples of his boundaries that he put in place for us, that's part of the how do I say no? Like if you're asking yourself, how do I say no to, whatever I'm doing that's good? Like, how do I say no to that? How do I give that up? How do I do these things? It is within those boundaries, right? It really is. We're still learning boundaries. We have boundaries in our marriage to protect our marriage. We have boundaries in our family to protect our family. And now we're learning boundaries with our ministry, where it's like we can't just say yes randomly. Like we have to be very protective, not because we don't want to help all the people. If you come to us, please, we want to help you. But also we're learning our boundaries within that. And if we don't learn those boundaries, if we're not able to set up these boundaries, then you're not going to be effective in anything you do. You really aren't. You're not going to be the husband that you're called to be. You're not going to be the father you're called to be. You're not going to be whatever you're called to do. You're not going to be able to do to your fullest unless you are starting to put boundaries in place.
Yeah, you won't be great.
Yeah,
because I'm just thinking, go all the way back to, I don't know, episode 2 or whatever, we're chosen priesthood, we're holy and set apart, right? So that idea, holy, is to be used for specific purposes, right? Yeah, so they didn't go in and use the cups and the temple just because they wanted to get some water, right? They had a special purpose for things. Well, God has special purposes for us and planned for us. If you're in Christ, he has a purpose for you. That was planned out for you. And you think I remember this reference because it's one of my favorite passages, but it talks about Jesus and the Samaritan woman, not the one at the well. This is a different episode. Yeah. in today's episode of Jesus, yeah. It was a different section where the Samaritan woman comes up to Jesus because her son is sick and dying, and Jesus is like, "Woman, what do I have to do with you?" Right? And she's like, "Well, my son's dying." He's like, "Yeah, but that's not what I was sent here for. I was sent here for these specific things. Not that she was a Samaritan and all that, but he said, look, this is my focus. This is my priority. This is what my purview, so to speak, was, and this is what I need to make sure that I'm taking care of." It's all this other stuff is important. All this other stuff needs to be done and addressed. He talked about how the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So it's not that he's not aware of that. And now she comes back with a cool thing saying, yeah, but even don't the dogs sometimes get crumbs from the table? Right. And he's like, true. And it's your faith has healed your son. So he didn't outright say no, but he did say, I'm here for a purpose, for a specific thing. And this has to be my focus. And I filter everything through this focus. Kind of like when God rested on the seventh day of creation. It's not because God was tuckered out. It's because it was an example. This is something that we need rest. We need a Sabbath. We need to recharge. We need to be good to focus on God and our relationship with him and our family and resting and getting ready to do other things. So, yeah. So there we have it with this idea of not needing to be everything to everybody and not needing to make sure that we're addressing everything except for being okay with saying, you know what, it's okay for me to say no to this. It's okay for me to step away from this. It's okay for me to not be at church all the time, every time the door's open, even though it feels holy. It feels like I'm doing good things when I'm there and that's where I should be. But that's still not what God necessarily asks you to do. I can't say he doesn't. I mean, there might be some people out there who are probably single, which there's nothing wrong with being single. I don't mean that to come out with any kind of tone. Because Paul said, look, if you don't need to get married, don't, because you can serve God better. Or he didn't out and out say that directly. That's the Chris paraphrase phrase, but that's right. The idea is so that way you can be more dedicated and single-minded and focused on doing the things of God. But when you're married, guys, then we got a new ministry that becomes all the more important. Okay, but with all that to say, with an impending hurricane that's causing video and audio issues, so we're on borrowed time. Boundaries are good. Boundaries are important. The ability to say no to things is actually an important and helpful thing. It will benefit your life, but you got to know what your priority is first, right? So if if you haven't set your priority, or if it's just like this nebulous, oh yeah, of course God's my priority. Okay, well, you got to lock it in. Yeah. You got to figure out, okay, if God is your priority, what does that look like? What is your time look like because of that? What is how you choose to commit to things and what you commit to? That's got to be all filtered through that. It actually kind of helps, right? So we can get that all in set up. And then so like Brad you were saying, with our ministries, how do we back away from certain things that don't necessarily fit into what God's asking us of the time? Because even if Jesus is going to say, I only have certain things that I'm going to do with the time that I'm allotted on this earth. God, with all the powers of being God as well, right, then it absolutely needs to be an example. Yeah, absolutely needs to be an example for us. So know that boundaries are good. Know that saying no for healthy reasons is good. Then, you know what, start to put that into place and into play in ways that's going to benefit your walk with God, that's going to benefit how if you're married, your relationship, so that way your wife's not getting your scraps, so that way your kids aren't getting your scraps. And you know what, guys, even your work will start to get better because you're taking care of yourself and you're not overloading yourself at work. And so that way what happened to Chris and Brad? They used to be so great, but now they're just mediocre. Well, because they stopped saying no, to the things that they should be saying no to, right? Because else, if we take on everything and we say yes to all the good, and we're saying no to the great, then we just become average. And we want you to stop being average and become better than your average man. We'll see you next time.